Great. Welcome everyone to our third and final LOSD care session of this school year. It's our pleasure to share with you another wonderful resource, this time talking about digital media for parents and guardians and how we help our children navigate our digital world. Justine Kovac, she is with the Children's Center. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justine. She has a lot of great info to go through. Just so you know, we do have there is a Q&A function, and I know that Justine will be asking you questions throughout the presentation. And also, certainly, if you do have other questions that you want to ask, feel free to type them in there. And our amazing school counselors who are on with us can either answer them specifically, or we will open them up to the group at the end when it comes time for Q&A. So with that, Justine.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Mary Kay. Yeah, again, so glad to be here. My name is Justine, again, from Children's Center. I'll talk for a moment before digging into the material about who Children's Center are, for those who may not be familiar, because I hope that you walk away knowing about us as a resource as well. And yeah, we're going to talk today about digital safety. What does it mean to be a parent in this age of devices and social media and internet access almost all the time, everywhere? And so we start with this idea of being a Goldilocks parent, right? So what does that mean? It's not either end of the extreme, kind of finding a middle ground. But also when we think about Goldilocks, trying the different food, the different items, it's about finding what is a good fit for her too, right? So I think when we think about this Goldilocks idea, it's not either extreme, finding a place in the middle, but also being responsive to your specific child and your specific child's needs. And so I know we may have folks with kids of a lot of different ages here, kind of across the district and the schools. So hopefully you all can kind of walk away with some information that feels applicable for your child, kind of wherever they are in their development. So I would invite, just as I get going, if folks want to share in the chat just the ages of your kiddos that you're thinking about today, go for it. But I'll kind of keep us moving along. As Mary Kay said, there'll be a couple opportunities. We're going to have a couple poll opportunities, so for folks to kind of answer some questions and look at different perspectives, and then also kind of thinking more specifically about your kiddo and things that you might walk away with. So again, the team here are going to be kind of monitoring the chat, but then we're going to hold space for about 15 minutes at the end for a good Q&A session as well. So there'll be an opportunity at that point to discuss and respond to more specific questions. So again, Children's Center, we are the Child Advocacy Center for all of Clackamas County. And so Child Advocacy Centers are organizations that provide assessment and services for kids and families when there's concerns about abuse or neglect. So we are a private nonprofit. We're in Oregon City, up near Willamette Falls Hospital. And we have kind of trained specialty providers, so medical examiners, forensic interviewers, and family support specialists who can see kids and kind of be a neutral, child-friendly place for kids to kind of talk about what they've experienced and for us to kind of assess what concerns might be going on. We partner with, and receive referrals certainly from DHS child welfare, from our law enforcement partners, but also from folks from school counselors, and can receive calls directly from parents as well. So just know that we are a resource for our community kind of on all those topics. And of course, when we're kind of looking at concerns of abuse or neglect, that includes, online sexual abuse or online exploitation. And so those are concerns that we address on the intervention side of things as well. And so part of the reason I'm excited to kind of talk about digital safety, because we also, do work in the community around preventing these types of harms from occurring in the first place. My role here, I'm the clinical outreach specialist. So I am kind of both on our clinical team doing some of that that intervention and support, specifically when kids may be struggling with their own sexual behaviors. And then I also am a part of our prevention team and get to speak to groups like you all to kind of address, again, the kind of preventative side of things. And as we kind of talk about the digital safety piece, I'm kind of coming at this from certainly that prevention perspective, wanting to prevent harm from occurring, but also kind of from a child behavioral lens. So before this work, I did a lot of direct care work with kids and families who'd experienced trauma and kind of around addressing challenging behaviors. So that's kind of the focus I'm bringing today. And there's our contact information. Again, you can reach me at that phone number, but that's also our main organization phone number. We do have some good resources on our website, especially if you're interested in learning more about kind of who Children's Center are, what child advocacy centers are. And then feel free to email me again. We've only got an hour today. And as we all were prepping for this, we had so many good kind of topics and questions we wanted to cover, and knowing we're not going to address them all, this could easily be a multi-day workshop. So feel free to reach out again if you have specific kind of follow-up things that you're working on with your kiddo or specific resources, any of that, I welcome and encourage you all to reach out to me. So kind of just goals for today, again, in the time that we do have, my goal is to kind of provide just some good overview about kind of technology and online safety. Know that you all are experts too. You're navigating this with your own kiddos. So again, just kind of provide some overview of what are some of the things we want to think about when we're addressing those topics, and kind of look at the unfortunately wide range of safety issues that can come into play. And then looking at really how kind of that teaching piece and that kind of conversation and work that you might want to engage with your own kiddo specifically around how to kind of talk about these issues with kids and strategies you can use to kind of promote that safety, those safe behaviors with your own children. And then again, kind of looking at those some examples of expectations you can set, kind of safety pieces. But I also hope that you walk away kind of with some more knowledge of all the resources that are out there. Because again, this is a super timely topic. It's an issue that everyone is navigating. And certainly in the last month, I've seen both the American Psychological Association and the US Surgeon General put out kind of reports and recommendations around social media and technology specifically for teens. So I know I've been seeing a lot of news kind of related to those releases as well. And I think we included both of those along with a lot of other resources in the folder of resources that will be available for you all to access as well. So I encourage you to kind of know that there's a lot of stuff there for you to take a look at. So just kind of overview as we're jumping into this, I do, again, as we're all on Zoom, just consider who might be around your computer, whether you're using headphones or not. I am going to acknowledge pornography, sex, and certainly, again, kind of thinking about child sexual abuse. So just please be conscious and also take care of yourself. This can be a challenging topic for a lot of reasons. We all kind of come at this from our own perspective. So, there can sometimes be some strong feelings or opinions around what should or shouldn't be happening. This may be something that is a super poignant topic for you and your kiddo. Maybe this is something where there's a lot of tension right now and it's on your mind. And then, certainly we know that with the group of folks, with, any group of folks that we have, the chances that, any of you or any of your kiddos have experienced online facilitated abuse, statistically I see we've got 48 folks logged in, is high. We know that these experiences are all too common. So again, just please feel free to take care of yourself. And then again, just kind of considering there's so many ways we can kind of look at technology, and certainly it's something that should, and we hope, and I think both those reports I mentioned are encouraging that it should be addressed at the societal level, at the legislative level, right? And we think about technology companies and all the media that's out there, we want other people and companies and our government to care about that being safe for kiddos. We hope that, I hope that kind of continues to be a topic of conversation, and maybe there's some change there. But again, I'm really going to focus kind of at the individual family level, knowing that this is something that you're dealing with every day, your kids are dealing with every day. So really kind of consider that more individual and family level in terms of things you all can do. And I think also just acknowledging, we're still kind of in the midst of really rapid change. The technology revolution is really ongoing. And in terms of kind of research and understanding impacts, that kind of long-term impact piece is something that we're going to kind of continue to see, I think, research kind of catch up with, and can continue to see play out. So just again, that reminder that some of these technologies have not been around for very long. They're still pretty new in kind of the span of human history and development. And kind of with that being said, just that reminder, you all know this, right? Your kids' relationships to their devices are different than you as their grown-up, their parent, their caregiver, but also for those of us who work with kids and families, right? That even just a few years of age difference really, with that quick and kind of rapid change of technology, means those norms, those relationships are really different. And so for kids who've grown up with phones and social media, that's been a part of their life, their whole life, that relationship is really different. And so when we kind of get to looking at ways to talk about it and kind of promote safety with your kiddo, I think that's a piece that we really always want to keep in mind, and engaging in those conversations. And just thinking again about how that impacts kiddos. So even just some of those dynamics around kids are really used to having pictures taken of them from phones, and what might that mean for kids' ability to kind of recognize when those behaviors or those photos might kind of be violating boundaries. So thinking about private part rules and those kind of sexual abuse concerns, like what does it mean for kids who are really used to having photos, any kind of photo taken of them, to even kind of differentiate some of those lines and boundaries. I think when we kind of consider the way technology is used and what that means for kids' ability to kind of, again, differentiate between things that are safe or things that are unsafe. Thinking about pornography access, we'll talk a little bit about that too, but research really is showing, right, again, pornography has really changed since most of us were kids. Obviously there's pornographic content every app, every website. It's not just pornography sites, but also that access is really happening almost 100% of the time. I think 96% of kind of access to some of the biggest porn sites are happening on phones, right? So it's all happening on the same device. So we think about when kids may be exposed to or accessing some of that content on the same device that's used for communication, that they're texting their friends on, that they're on Facebook on. Just thinking again, what does that mean when it's all happening in the same physical place with the same object, and what does that mean for sharing, sending, and those dynamics when there's not a big step between looking at something and the ability to share it. And then just again, that reminder, right? Kids are in, developing and experiencing changes to their brain at such a rapid pace. And so, remembering that certainly for considering the impact that these technologies and exposure to things can have during this, kind of period of development. But also kids have a lot of capacity to change, right? They're learning, they're growing as they move through development. So I think that reminder too, even when it feels, again, can feel so hard, if there are concerns that come up with your kid or you're worried about how they're using technology, just that reminder too, as they're continuing through development, they do have immense capacity to change. So I share that as just the reminder to also that we can be hopeful, and that the conversations you have and how you engage with your kiddo around this stuff really does matter, and it does make a difference. So when we think about technology, again, right, just this overall reminder, there are lots of great things about it. I know it can be really easy to get stuck in all of the concerns, all of the safety concerns, reading about how, the impact that we know it's going to have on kids' brains, looking at kind of potential mental health impacts. But there are lots of great things about it, right? Thinking about that ability for connection, especially, as we've all been through the pandemic, that ability to stay connected, that, just the resources that are available in terms of learning. So do always kind of want to remember that side of it too. And, that's just that reminder that the influence is going to depend on how it's used. So some of those kind of more recent studies and recommendations are really kind of looking at kind of problematic usage. And I know there often are lots of questions, and certainly is, I think, a hot topic of conversation around, is social media an addiction? Are phones addictive? And kind of thinking about what, from the framework of what we know about other types of addictions. But I think, yeah, this framework of problematic usage is a little bit more broad and helps us think about, when is it becoming a problem? And that's not a clear-cut line necessarily, but we will kind of talk a little bit about some of those places to consider in terms of intervention. But again, that piece of it's going to depend on how it's used, and it's going to depend on the skills of the person using it. And so I think, again, as I'm kind of coming at this from a behavioral lens, what we know, about kids is some of those skills as their, brains are rapidly developing and continuing to do that kind of big development through their early 20s. We know that some of those, especially the kind of prefrontal cortex, that part of our brain that's doing self-regulation, that long-term thinking, those are all skills that are really continuing to develop throughout childhood. And so those types of things may be hard. And will be hard for kiddos. And so again, to think about the intersection of the skills and abilities of your kiddo or any of us in terms of, again, kind of that self-regulation, the attention, understanding long-term consequences. And I think all those things are at play as we kind of think about some of the safety concerns. And then, of course, you all know, right? So almost all teens have access to a smartphone. Many teens, are identifying they're online almost all the time. And I think this graphic here does a good job of kind of, again, showing us that point of things are changing so rapidly. And so looking at what apps kids have ever used, and this is about teens specifically, but that changed just from 2014 to 2015 when, they didn't even ask about kids using YouTube, even though it existed, and looking at like the decline of use of Facebook, right? So again, I think when we're thinking about safety and supervision in those conversations, just that reminder too, the landscape's going to constantly be changing. And so thinking about not just one app or one device that might be a concern, but thinking a little bit more globally about what skills can you help your kid develop to engage safely, and what kind of protections can you put in place to try and keep them as safe as possible as they're developing the skills and kind of moving forward. So again, it's not just about one app or one concern. And then specifically, again, kind of thinking for kids who are using social media, so likely, right, are kind of teens or older kiddos, we always want to kind of remember again that just when that the positive piece of it too, right? And the research does back up that some amounts of social media can help kids feel connected to their peers. For kids who may kind of have marginalized identities or be extra isolated for whatever reason, that can be, again, kind of an important protective factor in terms of them having supportive peer relationships. And to get kids to engage in conversations, it is going to be important to acknowledge the positives. Because if we're just saying, these are the bad things, these are the worries, kids are going to tune us out as the grown-ups. And so if we really want to engage them in those conversations. And then, of course, just kind of thinking about all the dynamics that can be at play in terms of just all of the peer dynamics that can be amplified online. So as we kind of are going to shift a little bit into strategies and kind of the process we're going to look at for how to address this with your kiddo and the different things to consider, you can kind of think about riding a bike, right? You don't just give your kiddo a bike one day and expect them to get to school safely and never talk about it again, right? So you teach your kid how to use the bike. You practice with them. There's rules about using the bike. There's protections, right? They have helmets. You're probably, before sending them off to school, going to do it together and practice together a bunch of times. You're going to keep checking in about it. You're not just going to never talk about it again and assume everything is safe and perfect. And this last point, someone who was speaking on this topic that I listened to recently kind of made this last point too. Kids didn't invent bikes. Kids didn't invent social media or phones. Frankly, neither did any of us, unless there's someone I don't know in the audience who had some experience there. But again, just that piece of let's not blame them for wanting to use them, right? And for any of us, we're not responsible for that piece. But this is a parenting issue, right? This is a safety issue. And so it is important that we all figure out ways to address it. So when we think about what are those safety issues, again, I'm sure that you all kind of have a lot of these things in mind, but I do think it's important as we shift into thinking about kind of safety things to put in place, conversations to have with your kiddos, to make sure to not just always come at it from a really general sense, but to have in mind, what are your concerns? What are the safety concerns you should be worried about? So when you're looking at putting rules in place, putting safety pieces in place, and talking to your kids about it, it's not just general, you're kind of getting into the specific. So of course, as the piece that I talked about, those dynamics of sexual abuse and exploitation that can happen online, folks, the phrase kind of sextortion is a newer framework we use to kind of look at, adults online who may make threats and to get child sexual abuse material, or what kind of we've called child pornography in the past. So thinking about images being shared, sexual images being shared, or videos, and the ways that folks online may, try and entice kids to share those things. And then, of course, the risk being that those can then get shared out or be used in other ways. And that, yes, all sorts of harms associated with that. Kind of this next point, again, this is some language that one of the kind of experts in this field that we'll talk about in a little bit use, but self-generated child sexual abuse material, which is really, right, images or video that someone's taking of themselves that without clothes on, or that are kind of otherwise explicit. And so, right, kids are talking about sending nudes, sexting, kind of that sharing of images that they have taken of themselves. I touched on exposure to pornography, right? But again, that piece, it's easy to see by accident. We know a lot of kids' first exposure to porn isn't intentional. It exists on every platform. It's not just about Pornhub or other pornographic sites, right? It can be everywhere. In the past, I think a few years ago, we kind of looked at for kids' first exposure to porn maybe happening around 11, 12. More current research is looking at like 8 or 9. And so again, just knowing kids can see it by accident, as maybe they have questions and are Googling things or on the internet, it's easy to come across other kind of explicit content. And then kids may seek it out as well, right? So again, it's not just kind of the one place or one concern, but I think that piece of, and certainly with a lot of these issues, it may happen earlier than you think. And so as we talk about those conversations and engaging with your kiddo, that reminder, you're probably going to want to be having some of these conversations and start having some of these conversations at younger ages than you probably hope or think about having them. The mental health impacts, and again, I think both those kind of recent reports are great summaries of kind of where the current research is on the mental health impacts, but definitely kind of concerns around impacts on attention span, increases in depression and anxiety. And then of course, thinking about like self-esteem and body image and those issues when, again, thinking especially about our teenagers, that comparison game and that exposure to other content. So those dynamics, of course, all those other peer pressure, bullying issues, again, that you can and do happen online, that fear of missing out, something we all kind of talked about when kids post about things that other kids weren't invited to, or they see their friends. I mean, not just true for kids, right? I think that shows up for us as grownups too, that kind of comparison game. And then of course, thinking about, right, hate speech, racism, sexism, other types of content that can be really harmful for kids. And again, thinking about our kiddos who may be more vulnerable to those types of content. And misinformation, fake news, again, that's not just a kid thing, but again, thinking about kiddos' skills and that brain development piece, they may have less ability to kind of understand the context behind information they're seeing. So I think it is important to kind of consider that piece too. And then of course, privacy, right? Thinking about information that kids share, opportunities for identity theft, but also just reputation and what that can mean for kiddos. So again, a very short overview, but wanted to kind of lay out some of those specifics we want to consider as we shift into talking more specifically about kind of what do we do? What do we do with all this information? What might that look like? You will see on a couple of these slides that have that image in the corner, the heart with the kids. A few of these are from our partners at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who are one of the resources that I'll highlight as we keep talking, but they have so many great resources and have a lot of expertise on these topics. So we kind of use the framework that they talk about as well to teach online safety with, right? Ground rules, monitor and supervision, talking about how you as the adults are engaging with the platforms that kids are using. You're talking about it in real life. It's not just a one-time conversation, it's ongoing conversations. And then we'll talk at the end about kind of not always resorting or focusing or threatening to take technology away, and kind of talking about the cons of doing that and other consequences that may be more appropriate or productive. So in this first step, teaching, kind of establishing ground rules. So I would say even kind of before coming up with ground rules, and again, I know that most of you are engaged in this process in some way with your kiddo. So, but I think really we encourage, primary caregivers, so parents, whoever kind of the guardians, grown-ups, whoever kind of are the primary folks supervising and caregiving for a child, really just taking stock of what devices in your house or does your child have access to that connect to the internet. And so again, with kind of technology expanding, it's not just about phones and tablets or laptops, right? Thinking about other smart devices, smart speakers, right? Those are things that connect to the internet, thinking about gaming devices. I think it can be helpful just to kind of start out with, oh yeah, okay, these are the devices, these are the things we're going to kind of talk about. And really trying to get on the same page about expectations and values between the kind of primary caregivers for a child, because again, we all have kind of grown up with different expectations and values. And certainly, again, those are kind of ever changing. So trying to get on the same page with other caregivers for your kiddo, and just making sure the adults who care for your kid know the rules and that your kid knows the rules. And we'll talk about how to engage with your kiddo around that. But I think just normalizing having those conversations with other adults in your community too. Right. So thinking about if your kid's going over to a sleepover, if you're hosting kids at your house, just normalizing that conversation between adults who are supervising kids about, yeah, what are the rules in your home? Like, what are the dynamics going to be? So again, we can kind of normalize talking about it, but again, make it clear if you kind of what your specific expectations are for your kiddo. So this, Mary Kay, is where we're going to do the poll question. So we'll see those coming up, but this is a tool that kind of around self-assessment for the grownups and caregivers. So when we think about kind of getting on the same page about values and expectations, really looking at considering carefully what do you think is okay for your kid? I think we don't always do that in a proactive way and kind of really different expectations. So this is just an example of some questions you might consider, and we'll put a couple to you all today, but really just looking at what age do you think it would be appropriate for your kid to do these things, and having that be kind of a starting point for some conversation.
I'm ready when you are. Let me know which poll you want me to. Should I start with one and then the other?
Yep. Sounds good.
So I'll start with age of cell phone use.
Perfect. Yeah. So this will be for you, you all who have kiddos who already have smartphones. You can kind of answer this at what age did your kid get their own smartphone? And if you have kiddos who don't yet have a smartphone, at what age do you think it would be appropriate, or what age are you planning to get them a smartphone? this isn't a test. There's no, I hope you're, as you know, maybe you're already starting to figure out, there's, you know, I don't have a lot of clear, this is exactly how you should do it. We really want to kind of consider all those factors. So I'm hoping we can just kind of see the range of some answers. So
I should say all responses are anonymous, so we don't know how you're answering it.
Perfect. Thank you for that reminder. Yep. Maybe give another moment and then we can close it and see. All right, you want to go ahead and close it?
Yeah. Do you want to share out those, or do you want to do the second poll first?
Let's share those. Yeah, let's go ahead and share those answers.
I don't know. Let me see. Sorry. Share results.
There you go. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So here we go. Love this, right? So we're seeing certainly a lot of generally, right, kind of the older kiddos know and answered, I think my 5-year-old should have a smartphone, which again, I think, and as we think about Goldilocks, that extreme, right? There's not a lot of folks likely at that extreme, but a lot right in between, right? Okay, 62% of folks, the 12 to 13. So it's kind of that biggest group, but then, right, we have folks kind of on some other ends as well. So there's not an obvious consensus, but again, kind of generally within this range, but and I think, again, that kind of validates this perspective that you got to figure out what's going to work for your family and your kid. And there's lots of factors to consider.
Great.
Let's
I'm going to stop sharing this one and then I will launch the second poll here.
Thank you. So at what age do you feel it would be appropriate for your child to talk to strangers on the internet? Again, thinking about all the different apps or places or things that could look like, but thinking about, again, kind of from your perspective as the grown-up, at what age do you think that's appropriate for your kid to engage in? Just wait another moment. All right, Mary Kay, are you able to close it? Thanks. And then we'll look at those results. Nice. Okay. So kind of similarly, right, looking at these older kiddos, but definitely, right, 50% of folks really saying that's not something that I think is appropriate until my kid is an adult. And so a lot of, again, kind of variation there. And so again, this isn't, you know, I think an end all be all. There's not one clear right answer. But I love this tool, and I think you could add certainly lots of different questions or specifics if there are particular concerns kind of between the primary caregivers for a kiddo. But I love this as just a place to kind of assess where you're at, what your values and expectations are before kind of digging into rules. And it might be interesting to ask, you know, depending on your kiddo and the age of your kiddo, to ask your kids some of those questions, right? At what age do they think it's appropriate? And again, I think that can be a way to engage some conversation and assess where folks are at. You know, these are just kind of some examples, right, around what your expectations for technology use might be, some examples of rules or conversations, again, with those safety concerns in mind. Again, it's not an end all be all. These are just some examples and some of the ideas we kind of consider talking about, and we're going to look in a moment at some kind of tools to kind of engage with your kiddo around these. So I'm going to move to those in a second, but right, just thinking about those social dynamics, the privacy, being clear, especially with younger kiddos, you might really need to be specific about what does personal information mean? What does private information mean? We're going to be really concrete with kids, thinking again, the body safety rules, right? So we have private parts that are private. It's not okay to for people to look at our private parts or to share pictures of private parts. So getting at those kind of concerns, the social dynamics, right? Around how you treat other people, options for you as the grown-ups to, right, approve things before downloading, you know, if it's a kiddo who has their own devices. And I think that balance piece. And so again, kind of thinking about some of that research that does exist around impacts of technology and social media and devices on kids. You know, it's not necessarily just the primary impact of the device and what a kid is accessing, but also looking at what it might be getting in the way of. And so we know, right, blue light and devices can really have big impacts on sleep. And for our kids and our teens, getting good sleep is so important to mental health. And their overall development and well-being, but also those peer connections, exercise and movement. So thinking about, when that technology might get in the way of those other healthy things that we know are important. And then just that reminder that, right, the rules and expectations shouldn't stay the same forever, right? As your 8-year-old using a device versus your 17-year-old using a device, right? We want to kind of continue to engage in conversations and update rules and expectations based on your kids' skills and trust and development. And then there's this piece of good modeling as the grown-ups in their life, right? Kids are watching us as the adults in their life. They notice how you use your devices. Right? Not just about what you say, but about what you do. So really consider what messages you're sending to your kiddos with how you use your devices, and kind of keeping in mind that piece as well. I'm going to show you a couple different examples, but these are all resources that are in that folder as well. But thinking about kind of technology use agreements, I think is one tool or one way you can kind of look at setting those rules and expectations for your kiddo and in your household. This is an example from one particular organization that's pretty thorough, and it really kind of walks through some of those topics and rules and expectations that you might want to consider for your kiddo. And the idea being that this is a really collaborative process, right? That you're engaging with your child and kind of setting expectations and having these conversations, and that these types of technology agreements or online safety agreements, media agreements, right? There's lots of different versions. These are just a couple examples, but can be a really good tool to set those really clear expectations, right? So your kid will do well if they can, and part of that is having clear boundaries and expectations from the get-go. And then also just be a place if concerns do come up that you can kind of circle back to and use this on an ongoing basis. So that's kind of one tool that we kind of share around using, around kind of setting those expectations. So this next step, the monitoring, we also encourage, right? It's not just it's not just setting the rules and expectations, but also engaging strategies to keep your kids safe. Knowing a lot of those safety issues and concerns that can happen, even if your kid is doing the best they can, right? That there's concerns out there. And so again, this piece of we want the rules and expectations to change as kids grow up, as they build trust, but also as the ways that they're using their devices and the internet changes, right? And so maybe your young kid has a phone or device that's primarily around safety and being able to contact you if something happens, and you've got a lot of restrictions or limitations on how that device can be used. But then your teenager wants to start using social media, and you're kind of figuring out what that looks like. The way you might engage with them should change, right? Based on the way your kid is changing. And again, just kind of different considerations around how your kid is using it. And again, I know we've got folks with kids of a lot of different ages. So I think kind of thinking specifically about where your child is and how those can evolve over time. We also really encourage kind of use of different strategies around supervision and parental controls. And so there's so many different options out there that do really different things. So this is just an overview of a few different examples and kind of options to consider. I think it's so important to really figure out what exactly maybe the parental control app you download does, or what exactly the parental controls on your iPhone does, because there's so many different, right? Some are more focused on time limits and monitoring and kind of, can shut down a certain app or device after a time, it's used for a certain amount of time, right? There's some that are more focused on content filtering. And so they're blocking or filtering out certain types of websites, or there are ones where you have to enter the websites that you want to be blocked, and thinking about the different places that those things are used. So some thinking about options on your Wi-Fi router, right? There are often options for setting it a schedule, so your internet just turns off at a specific time. But well, if your kid has a phone that can also access data, that's not gonna, impact that access and some of those operating system controls. And so whether that be on a specific search engine or on the specific device, again, that's not going to show up on your computer, right? That may be more specific to the device. One thing, especially for the younger kids, that we really encourage kind of the use of technology in common areas. And so it's not going into bedrooms, it's not going into private spaces. And that allows you as the adult and the caregiver to really be able to intervene in real time. And again, that might be something as your kid develops trust and skills over time and gets older. That's not going to stay exactly the same, but definitely one strategy to consider. Again, the parental control apps, there's so many out there, and on the resources page, shared a link to a couple good reviews that kind of consider different options. Some are super expensive, some are free. So again, there's no one size fits all, but there are a lot of options out there. Those phone options, so there are a couple. The Guardian specifically has built-in protections and monitoring. So it's not an app that you're downloading that could then be deleted, but it's kind of built into the phone. And Gab Wireless is, I think now they both have phones and smartwatches that kind of physically look like iPhones or Apple Watches, but can't be connected to the internet, don't have data, and really have limited options around maybe listening to music, texting, or calling. And so I think some of those options could be intermediary steps, right? Of, okay, my kid needs a phone for safety reasons. I want them to have it, for some options there, but not ready to have all of the internet and kind of all those options. So again, not an end all be all, but we do encourage kind of considering some of the options that are out there, and what might help with your kiddo. Third step, engaging with the platforms, engaging with the devices that your kid is using, and really learning again about kind of what apps, what devices, what platforms they use or they want to use. So maybe they don't have a smartphone yet, or you haven't allowed them to use social media yet. I think that can be a great place to have some conversations and give you as an opportunity as a parent or a caregiver to really understand how those things work. So again, there's so many different apps and things out there. So really encourage you as the adults to really understand how it's used, what the options are out there, what the parental control options might be, and doing that research ahead of time about how to report inappropriate content. And so that's right. Most of our certainly social media apps and other gaming sites as well, right? They have specific processes for that kind of reporting. And so I think it's super important to familiarize yourself with those and talk with your kiddo about those too. That piece of being curious about your kid's experience, right? One of the things I touched on at the beginning, just that reminder, kids have different relationships with their devices and their technology than we do. And so really just engaging in those conversations and learning from your kid about what they like to use, right? What do you like about that game? What's your favorite, thing to do on that site? Just to really familiarize yourself with your kiddo's experience and that gaming piece too. So really thinking about what games they're playing, remembering that those devices have internet connectivity as well. I'm just looking at time, and so I am moving a little bit more quickly through a couple of these things. But again, these next slides are really just, I want to familiarize you with a few resources that are out there that are favorites of ours. And again, I think we've got these on the resource page in the folder, as well as some different examples. But I mentioned at the beginning, the National Center on the Missing and Exploited Children. So they really have so many both intervention and prevention resources, specifically around kind of the online sexual exploitation issues. They've got online kind of safety programming they've got stuff for educators as well, kind of around teaching, especially for the younger kids, kind of those online safety skills. They've got intervention and support services around removing explicit photos from the internet. So I think historically, we would say once it's out there, it's always out there. And certainly there are those consequences to consider, but there are kind of technologies and options out there now to look at kind of removing those from the internet. So they host some of those options there. Thorn for Parents is another great organization. They also do research, which they've got some interesting stuff about kids' experiences on the internet, but have some great conversation guides on specific topics. So if you walk away and kind of are wanting to talk with your kiddo about something in particular, that can be a great place to go to kind of think about how to engage some of those conversations and what some of those big talking points might be. On a specific topic. And Common Sense Media is another great place. I think historically, I know I knew them for like reviews on TV shows and movies in terms of what might be appropriate for kids of different ages, but now they've got great kind of reviews of different games, apps, websites, so kind of across the spectrum of different types of technologies. So that can be a great place to do that research, right? If your kid's like talking about Discord and you're like, I have no idea what Discord is or how it works. They have some great just kind of overviews of these are maybe the safety concerns. This is how the app works. And these are some of the options around the monitoring. So that's a great place to go to engage some of that. Chatting in real life, right? So it's not just about understanding how the technology works and being on the technology, but really, I think using it with your kid, that can be a great place to start conversation. So not just asking and learning about what those apps that they like do and why they like them, but also, hey, maybe you're going to sit down and play Roblox with them for a little while. And that can be a great way, especially if maybe you've had some tense conversations about technology limits in the past, to really show your interest and engage with your kiddo and have some fun. So all the conversations about tech use aren't always so maybe emotional or tense and kind of around setting limits and boundaries, but that can be a great place to kind of have some of that fun and have some more positive conversation. So it's not always kind of more tense and negative. And it gives you an opportunity to see those issues that come up in real time, right? And so kind of thinking about using specific examples and responding to specific conversations. And I move through this, I think we've really touched on a few of these things already, but again, kind of engaging in those conversations, really making sure to be specific about some of the concerns and some of those safety issues. I think, it can be a great strategy to give your kids just examples of scenarios and ask how they'd respond, right? So they're not just talking about, this is the concern that I want you to worry about, but helping them practice those critical thinking skills about how am I going to apply this information in the moment. And we know, right, when we learn new things, we need to practice them. And so I think that can be a great way to engage that. And, making sure to talk about their own behavior too. And so I think sometimes when we talk about prevention, we focus so much on, this is what people might try and, show you or get you to do, but we're also setting limits and expectations. It's not okay for you to share other people's pictures. It's not okay for you to bully others. So we're focusing on, every kind of the things that can happen to your kiddo, but giving them kind of clear boundaries and expectations about their behavior. Just a few, again, we kind of talked about the option of kind of engaging with your kiddo on the device or on the game, those National Center on the Missing and Exploited Children, that safety. They've got great kind of animated videos that are made for kids that kind of talk about different safety topics. Amaze is another great resource that produces made for kid videos on all sorts of different topics around bodies and sexual health. But they also look at some of that intersection kind of around sexual behavior in the internet. So they've got some great ones about sexting and pornography exposure. So I love the idea of, watching one of those videos with your kid. We always want you to watch it and kind of vet it yourself first so you know what you're getting into. But I think, again, that can be a great way to engage with your kiddo in the moment, but also learn together and kind of have that conversation, those conversations together. So continuing to talk about it and making sure that you have opportunities to engage with them, not always about setting limits and rules, but to engage on the positive end as well. Because as we kind of look at this last step, and again, this recommendation around not threatening to take devices away as kind of the only or kind of ultimate consequence, if your kid does do something unsafe or break a rule, and really some of the concerns around that is it can kind of unintentionally create some unsafe dynamics, right? it may really kind of discourage a kiddo to tell their parent, their caregiver, when something happens or when a mistake is made, because they're so afraid of that consequence. And we really want to encourage that open communication. We really want your kids to come to you when things happen, so you can be supportive. And so again, that's not to say you shouldn't, respond if they break a rule or something happens, but really kind of being conscious about not just always threatening to take the device away. And I think, again, we see that it can create really big emotional responses in kiddos. And I've certainly heard from some folks around kind of seeing increases in kind of suicidal behavior or comments and responses when that tech is taken away. And so just being kind of conscious of those dynamics and not wanting to unintentionally create kind of some more unsafe dynamics by just always threatening to take the technology away. So I think, when we think about consequences and what happens next, right? What's going to happen after there's a difficult situation or something unsafe happens, really just kind of thinking about what you want your kid to learn from the situation. And certainly if that does include, maybe you are going to increase your supervision in response to something happening, just kind of making sure to address those issues around, is this going to be forever or is this a short-term thing? And kind of talking with your kid about those issues so it doesn't just feel like my life is over, or I'm going to miss out on all, these opportunities with my peers. And again, kind of thinking back to where we started around kids' relationships to their devices are different and likely stronger and really kind of a core part of social dynamics these days. And so this is something that, again, our partners at NCMEC kind of share, again, just highlighting that important piece. We can't just tell kids not to do these things. We have to tell them what to do if it does happen, and make sure that they know that we're here to support them in actions and words. And so as I wrap up here and we shift into Q&A, just thinking again about your resources for reporting concerns and supporting your kiddo, thinking again about meeting their emotional needs. And you can do that without saying, great, I love that you did that, right? You can say, I know that you're sad or you're frustrated or you're upset about what happened, and making sure to support that piece. So I will, I think, stop sharing my screen as we shift into some Q&A. And I would invite folks as we do that to maybe just pop in the chat, if you're kind of walking away today and thinking about some of this content, what's maybe one topic you want to kind of engage with your kid around, or one tool or strategy you're thinking about maybe using or doing differently.
I will share that, because we get asked this every time we do these, that this presentation and all the resources that accompany it will be posted on the district website along with this recording, so people can have access to them afterwards. But we have a few minutes for Q&A. I know some questions came in while you were presenting, and then it's as if you saw it, Justine, and then answered the questions. So
love it.
I think I know one of the questions was what are good apps to oversee kids' phone usage and time limit, which you then addressed. So I'm going to assume that one was answered.
Okay.
But if someone still wants to know more about that, please chime in and we can answer it again. Another person chimed in, not really with a question, but just more of perspective that Discord may not be the best app. And I don't know if you have thoughts on different, I know there's different thoughts on different apps.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I see, I'm looking at that now and I think, that issues around things that are apps or options that are more confidential or anonymous, right? That's definitely something you want to consider, right? Is this something where things are more public, or anything that, and whether that's a specific app or option that is, right? They talk about the VPNs being hidden, right? That's a concern. But also thinking about, and in terms of conversations to have with kids, I always think about teaching them around, folks who may try and take a conversation from one app to a private app, or taking conversations or a chat from something that's public to something that's anonymous. So definitely, I would agree. There are some concerns there. And I think Discord, often gets framed or kind of started out as a gaming app. So cool, like it's a gaming opportunity, right? But that's a place where that doing the research part is super important, because there is those chat functions. There are all of these other functions, even if that's not maybe how it started. So yeah, definitely some important points to consider there. And I would say, yeah, that's not just Discord where there are those concerns. That's true in a lot of different apps. So that's that place where doing your research and doing that follow-up is super important.
Mary Kay, you're muted.
Oh, good call.
You would think I'd know that by now. Is there a generally advised age at which to allow social media like Instagram? What are the downsides to allowing a private IG account?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, with social media, I think we do have that option around. Most of them have an age, right? You're not allowed to have an account till you're 13, in theory, right? We all know, and I think again that understanding how things work, the age verification is so simple and so easy to override or just lie about. But I think that is, as you're thinking about rules and expectations, I think sometimes it can be helpful when you're a parent or a grown-up who's setting so many rules and expectations to also rely on other sources and be able to maybe take that one off of your plate. So you're not always just the bad guy, but hey, this is what it's for. And actually it's not allowed for you until you're 13. And so I think thinking about those kind of external boundaries and rules that you can kind of rely on too. And I think, yeah, the private public piece, certainly, again, when we think about weighing the privacy concerns, I think that is something, especially for younger teens, using those private accounts, I think can be a safer option in terms of those considerations. But again, it's not an end all be all, and it's not going to solve all of the issues either. And I think thinking about it's not just about one strategy, one option, or one tool is not going to solve everything. So I think always thinking about what are some of the other tools or strategies you're going to use. And maybe that's starting with, you're going to get a friend request from your mom. And that's going to be the expectation for a while. We're going to support you in learning to do this safely. So I think, again, balancing different strategies that you can use. So it's not just one thing, because again, the internet and all these devices are so complicated and used in so many ways. It's never going to be as simple as one solution.
Yeah. So I use the law for curfews.
Yeah, right.
It's helpful.
It can be. Yeah, I think it can so often, again, feel like you're always the bad guy. You're the one setting rules. And I know, right, your kids are going to tell you that sometimes, and have that pushback. And so I think, yeah, finding those ways where you can maybe release that pressure a little bit. And I think that component too of making sure every conversation you have about technology isn't about the bad stuff or isn't about setting rules. Because again, that can unintentionally just reinforce that dynamic that kids then aren't going to want to talk about it. They're not going to want to engage with you. And when we think about safety and protective factors, that open communication with a caring, safe adult is the biggest piece. And so we really want to make sure you're balancing out the rule setting and the expectation setting with some fun, with some positive engagement, to really reinforce that point, and encourage that kind of healthy relationship dynamic. And I think also just keeping in mind, again, wherever your kid is at or where you're at as a family, around kind of these issues and expectations, there will be pushback, right? And just that's to be expected. And I think we, again, as kids are growing up and pushing rules, and that is a part of their job. That's a part of them learning about the world. So don't be too deterred, on one hand, by getting a big response the first time you try and bring something up. You might really need to lean into the positivity to engage those conversations. But I think on the flip side, also being aware of those big emotional responses and being attuned to the mental health concerns and those safety issues. So kind of thinking about both sides of that coin.
Thank you, Justine. I know we are up against our
Yeah.
hour, and it was very thoughtful and thorough presentation with a lot of great resources for our family that we will be able to share out. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I want to give our LOSD Cares counseling team any opportunity, if you wish to say anything before we wrap up today. Anyone?
Families, we are so thankful you joined us. And Justine, thanks again on behalf of our entire CARES team and our community for empowering us to be better parents and counselors and teammates and family members for our kids. This is our final CARES session of this school year, but please stay tuned. We are so joyful to have a family wellness fair this October. And so we will have a lot of resources to meet you and to meet your kids where they're at. So please stay tuned for communication for that.
Thank you, everyone.
So
Have a wonderful
thanks
day.
all. Yeah, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justine.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me, y'all.
Our pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Bye.